Our casual sex culture is hurting women and men. It is the concern, the passion of Barbara Wilson, my guest today. She's the former director of sexual health education for the Alternatives Pregnancy Resource Center in Sacramento, California. She's spoken at the UN and all over America to youth and adults with sensitivity, honesty, and hope on things she has learned the hard way. And she writes about it. She's going to share it with us today. Welcome back, Barbara.
Thank you. It's great to be here again.
And your shorts give you away.
I know, I'm sorry.
Fresh off the plane from California.
I thought it'd be warmer here, but you know.
But guess what? Let me brag. You're from down the road, Grimsby,
That's
Ontario.
right. That's born and raised. Yes, very much Canadian. So it's great to be back.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
You've been busy.
I have been
busy.
Yes.
Tell us first of all about your trip to Cambodia and what you're doing over there.
Well, it's been an amazing journey. I've had the opportunity to go to Cambodia 3 times and work with an organization there that's helping rescue young children out of the sex slave trade. Cambodia is one of the big hubs for, sex slavery, and although it's happening all over the world, in Cambodia specifically, parents actually sell their young children, and so it's just been a horrible evil. But God is transforming that country and starting with the children and rescuing them and helping restore them from what has happened to them. So that's been a great joy to be able to do that.
You're bringing your wisdom to the healing that's needed.
Absolutely. I've been able to do some
rescued.
teaching on trauma over there and helping the people that work with the children that are currently being trafficked before they can be rescued and how to help them cope with their trauma.
Sex out of place, out of God's design, becomes a vicious thief, a robber of all that God intended. Give us some of the stats that are driving what you're doing.
Absolutely. We're just such a sexually broken and wounded generation, and around the world, studies are showing that at least 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men will be sexually abused before they're 18. And that's just the reported numbers. And so they feel that there's even a greater number than that. Recent studies show that between 95% and 98% of people have sex outside of marriage in our culture, and so we're talking
what was that again?
Between 95% and 98%, and that's not just before a first marriage, but also because of the high divorce rate, which is almost 50%. People are having sex in between marriages as well, and then you have almost 50% of women will have an abortion before they're 45, with I think it's like 44 million abortions worldwide every year, and so. All of this is related to our casual, sex culture and how it's hurting men and women and children and marriages, families. And, God just gave me that passion because we're such a broken generation, and it's just getting worse.
Well, you're going after this with a vengeance.
Yes.
I want to mention this one first, the invisible bond, how to break free from your sexual past.
Right.
I think this is the core issue. And I think if young people especially could understand what this represents, they might think twice. What is the invisible bond?
Right, and that was my first book, so I share a lot of my story in there of what God, taught me and did in my life. But one of the things, I was out teaching sexual abstinence, talking to young people about saving sex for marriage, and God was beginning to teach me about what this invisible bond is. And I think what the world kind of has this view that sex is just physical. You can have sex and move on. But what God began to show me was that we create this one flesh bond. It's not just physical, it's spiritual, emotional, mental, and even chemical. And that was the information that really changed my life when God began to show me that we release chemicals and hormones, oxytocin in particular, that He uses to create this one flesh bond.
That's the feel-good hormone.
That is
my favorite one.
Exactly. And in fact, so much study is being done on oxytocin. It is becoming the new cutting edge kind of thing. Scientists call it the love hormone. But, God really uses it to create a bond between mothers and their children, and then between couples. So we release it during sexual arousal and release, and over a long-term relationship, that bond gets stronger and stronger. But what God began to show me and start to use in my own life was studies beginning to show that every time you have sex with someone and move on to a new partner, we're actually starting to impair our ability to release oxytocin. We actually release a little less oxytocin. And so we can start...
less feel good.
Right, but not only that, less
road.
Bonding.
And
so
bonding.
with each partner, you're bonding a little less, but also you've created that one flesh bond, so you're bringing each of those partners with you into that next relationship.
And actually there's one more ingredient in that hormone. It's love bonding, and trust.
Trust.
So all of those are impaired.
Exactly. Exactly. In fact, oxytocin not only increases trust, but reduces fear and anxiety in relationships. So if you're releasing less of that, that's why even as women, we tend to become more guarded in the next relationship. So we trust less, we give less of ourselves away. And so you're bonding less. But I think some of the other impact of it is, you know, whatever God creates holy, the enemy wants to pervert and make ugly. And so with our past bonding, we also get this negative or perverted view of sex. We've been damaged by it. And so now we bring that into marriage. And that's all tied up with, you know, past relationships and sex. And so now women inside marriage have this damaged view of sex. And so now that starts to impair that relationship, and they're not able to bond with their husbands.
Less intimacy. Less enjoyment.
Exactly.
As well.
And less emotional bonding too, because it's all tied together, physical and emotional bonding.
Now here is your sad story that God is using so powerfully. You've been married 31 years to Eric?
31, yes.
4 children, 4 grandchildren.
Yes.
For 25 years, loving your husband, serving God in the church, but self-flagellation, condemnation.
Well, and my story was, you know, I had also had an abortion in my past, and I had been sexually active. I had also been married when I was a teenager. And so I had all of this shame. By the time I was 21, it just felt like all of that stuff had happened in my life, and here my life was just beginning, and it felt like it was over. And yet I still wanted to serve God, but felt like God would never be able to use me again. So I'm back in the church raising my children, asking God to forgive me over and over again, but living with this secret. And it was also impacting my marriage. You know, I didn't feel bonded to my husband, and I was struggling with sexual intimacy in my marriage, wondering why, you know, I wasn't enjoying it. And so it was as I began to learn this, God began to, like, you know, those little nudges and saying, Barb, this is you. This is why you're struggling in your marriage. This is why not only do you know, have I forgiven you, but you need healing. You need to heal those past the wounds that you've created, those lies that you've accumulated. You need to break those bonds that you've created in the past so that you can have that kind of bond with Eric. That would be, you know, an intimate bond.
And the Lord really did set you free.
He really did. It was so amazing. And you know, when I started doing this, I had no idea I was going to be like on TV or radio or talking to anybody. It was just my story. And I felt like I was the only one who'd messed up, actually. Isn't that funny? We always think it's just about us. And so I really had no intention of telling my story, because I thought it was just about me. But then as I started sharing, God began to show me that there's so many broken and wounded people. And I started thinking, wow, I'm not the only one. And people were just like gravitating to, well, if God can break your bonds, can he break mine? Like, you know, can God restore me? Can God restore oxytocin in my brain? And all of these amazing questions. And that's really what led to writing. I never really planned to write books or go around the world speaking about sex, but I know it's God's message of hope and healing to this broken world. And if God can do it in my life and in the thousands that he's privileged me with the opportunity of leading through healing, I know that he can do it for anyone.
You know, Kay Warren is here on Friday, wife of Rick Warren, The Purpose-Driven Life. Rick said this: the very experiences that you have resented or repelled most in life, the ones you've wanted to hide and forget, are the experiences God wants to use to help others. They are your ministry.
Well, you know what's so amazing about that? Because I quote that all the time, because as I was going through healing, I was doing that book. And it was that day, and I have a little closet where I spend time with God, and I was reading that chapter, and God said to me, will you let me have your past? And I was starting to go through healing, and I was going, no, you can't have my past. Because I knew I was already speaking, you know, teaching abstinence, and I thought, God's going to want me to share my story. And I was so afraid, because I had kept it hidden for so long. And I just felt in that moment that God's peace, God said, you can trust me with your story. I'm going to use it to bring hope and healing to the world. And so I remember I actually physically held up my hands, reading that chapter to God and saying, okay, I'm going to let you have my past. And if you can use it to bring even one other person hope. And since then, it's just been, that was about 8 years ago, and God's been blowing my mind ever since with what he's been doing with just my simple story.
And you honestly and rightly say the cover-up, the work of image management, it takes so much more energy.
Absolutely.
Than just saying, hey, I've blown it, but God.
And you know what's also interesting about that? Because not only do we help men and women heal from their sexual past and give them a view of God's view of sex and break bonds from the past, but there's freedom in that. To be unleashed from your past and the shame and the condemnation and feeling that your whole identity is tied up with your past. One of the most amazing things that we see as women go through healing is that they're unleashed to be able to serve in ways that they would have never imagined. So I just got an email from a woman up in Washington who took a bunch of women through the Bible study for healing. And she was emailing me to tell me just the incredible healing these women have had, but the most amazing thing, not only did they feel closer to God, but also they feel, inclined now to serve. Like they want to start leading Bible studies to help other women heal. And that's what's happening to the church as we have healing.
That is so what God does. It's
Exactly.
just what he does.